You're listening to the Northtown Automotive Extra Point Show with Zach and Josh. Brought to you by Northtown Automotive. Whatever you're looking for, you'll find it at Northtown. Shop online at northtownauto.com.
I think it really is remarkable that Josh has gone from a player that was known for chaos and he's gone into control, a player that was known for reckless and he's gone into just aggression, a player that at times early on was careful and now he's just really smart with the football. And no, he wasn't remarkable when it came to the statistical performance, but in reality, the difference of the game is one team took care of the football in an incredibly high level, and one team didn't. And to beat an all-time great offense with the #1 ranked defense, and that's who Baltimore was, that's what was going to be necessary. They called it, and they executed it that way.
There's ESPN's Dan Orlovsky talking about the Bills' game plan against the Baltimore Ravens, how it went down. Looking at the tape, the Bills played it exactly how they wanted to, and Josh, they've just become such a physical team up front on that offensive line. They are deliberate in everything they do. I talked a lot about that with Detroit, where kind of anything you see on the field on their offense, they meant you to see it. It's sort of the same thing with the Bills. It seems like everything they do, it's meant to happen. Such a well-coached team. Brady's doing well. Aaron Kromer on that offensive line. What a get he has been for the Bills in that offensive line. Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins both have flourished, and two of the best tackles in the NFL. We're going to get more on both, of course, that Baltimore Ravens matchup, how the Bills got to win, but also, of course, it is AFC Championship week. The Bills are back in the AFC Championship for the first time since 2020. It's eerily similar how they've gotten there. Joining us now on the Wester Hotline, Cover One's Aaron Quinn joins us. Aaron, have you thought about that much? How they got to the AFC Championship playing the exact same team to then play the exact same team. It just I only realized that the night it happened, and it sat with me a little weird.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that till you just said it, but it makes sense. History sort of repeats itself. Hopefully the Bills can control a little bit more of their destiny and rewrite the narrative here going against KC. I saw an interesting one about how many times it took Manning to overcome the Patriots, and I think that is one of these sort of interesting narratives when, they lose to the Chiefs so many times in a row here. There's a lot of these in sports history, whether it was Jordan versus the Pistons, Manning versus the Patriots. It's a narrative until it's overcome, and hopefully this is the year they overcome it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And another one that I hadn't thought of in a long time, too, was Steve Young and the 49ers over the Cowboys. It's everywhere in every sport. Football's kind of famous for them too, and it's not like a scientific thing to say, but for me, where I'm sitting here Wednesday at what are we at 11 in the morning, I feel really good about this matchup, Aaron. I didn't think they matched up particularly well against Baltimore, and yet they got past them. I thought they always matched up better with Kansas City, and here we go.
Yeah, I was a little overly nervous, I think, even in the wild card matchup of just like, hey, this is a weird one that could be a trap game for the Bills if they don't come to play. And then last week I was super nervous. And I was actually texting with your boy Nate Geary last night, and we were talking about this matchup. And not to sound cocky, I just felt less pressure as a fan and a content creator that covers this game of like, I just feel at peace with it, and I don't know if that's because I believe the Bills are going to win or just I feel confident in the style of football they're playing, that they won't get raced in this game, that even if this is a close game, they're not going to lose their composure in these moments. McDermott seems looser, so I don't know if it's the vibe around the team or what it is. I can't make it a quantitative thing as to why we feel this way, but Nate and I were both kind of like, yeah, this feels weirdly at peace and calm going into a huge matchup, and obviously tons of pressure, right? Because for years since that 2020, we've heard, this is the team, this is the hump, this is what you've built your team to get over as the Kansas City Chiefs, and so you'd think the pressure would be more than what we felt going against Baltimore, and I just don't feel it right now here. Like you said, on Wednesday, I'm sure it'll ramp up here as the weekend gets into it and the pressure really ramps up, but right now I just don't.
Yeah, Saturday night into like Sunday morning is going to be the worst time in the world. I was kind of right there with you, too, where it was like Sunday, I thought once the game kicked off, especially because I worked the games, I thought I was just going to relax. It got worse. I had a stomach ache for like the entire first half. The whole second half, I'm sweating it out. Oh, good time for everybody. You mentioned, though, the style of play that the Bills are playing right now. I find them in Kansas City playing an eerily similar style where they both just don't make mistakes. and assume and or pressure another team into making them and capitalize. You could argue it's boring or what have you, but Aaron, what have you seen from these two teams where, I mean, the Bills' last turnover was against the Patriots when they were in their red jerseys. The Chiefs' last turnover was against the Bills.
Yeah. Well, one, I know many of you guys over at WGR love golf analogies when we're talking sports, and the best golf is boring golf, right? It's not having double bogeys and worse. And that's really how the Bills are playing right now. And similar how the Kansas City Chiefs has had success. When they beat Baltimore in the postseason, it was, hey, allow them to hit doubles and triple bogeys, and we're just going to get pars and bogeys, and we're going to find our way down the field. And that's maybe my biggest concern about this game is the way both teams play, if they're playing their style, especially offensively. And we know the Bills' defense is vulnerable to some of those long drives. They are going to give up some third downs. They are going to let a team move up and down the field on them a little bit. Not necessarily by design, but it's just something that is happening. That could be a game that just really limits possessions. And we saw what benefited the Bills was the turnovers against Baltimore. Whether people want to argue they were forced or unforced, it doesn't matter. They still turned the ball over, which gave the Bills some extra possessions. You also got the extra possession at half. I know there was a lot of conversation about, should the Bills take the ball first and try to, flip the game script, but that extra possession at half still helps. They didn't get the double dip, but having the ability in those types of games to steal a possession matters. And so that is probably my biggest concern, is this could be one of those games where, each team maybe gets a possession the way they like to drive down the field and put together 10-plus play drives, and they're happy to do it, and they both want to keep the opposing quarterback off the field. And that could be a game that goes quick, that feels stressful, that maybe feels a little closer than it needs to be. And while I'm confident in the Bills, the Chiefs just find ways to win these close one-possession games. And so if it comes down to the fourth quarter and it's a one-possession game, I am not going to feel as good as I feel right here on Wednesday for sure.
So, Aaron, looking at the Chiefs specifically, I saw your tweet yesterday talking about how basically the last month for Kansas City has not really been meaningful games up until the playoff game. And even in that, Houston was a team that kind of limped into the playoffs. How do you look at what Kansas City has shown us since that Week 11 game against the Bills and just kind of almost just sort of preview what's going to happen here this Sunday? Because this Chiefs team has changed a lot since that Week 11 matchup, but the Bills have changed as well.
Yeah, and so we do a post-game show or a preview show here this week, and normally when I get into a team for a preview, I start about 4 weeks back and work my way because, you can go as far back as you want, but teams change and they evolve. And so I think if you get a month of football, you can get a pretty good trend and idea of what they're doing, where they're at, and you get a decent enough sample size against different opponents. You can't do that right now with the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Because if you go a month back, you only have one game here, at least with starters and stuff, right? That Broncos game doesn't count. And so it's really difficult. Even the data, I try to follow the data and the trends. It's really difficult to get a pinpoint on who the Kansas City Chiefs are. And you brought it up. I mean, last week, all we talked about was the regular season matchup between the Bills and the Ravens. And the national media was kind of highlighting that of they killed the Bills that time. But we knew the nuance between that matchup. It wasn't going to be the same matchup. And I think this is the same for Bills and Chiefs on both sides of the ball. There's a lot of nuance of why that game wasn't the same. And even in the historical playing this team, the Bills and Chiefs have played a ton over the last 5-6 years here. And I don't know that you can draw a whole lot. These teams are totally different than they've been in those previous years. And so I personally am having a difficult time sort of getting a read on them. But what we do know, Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, they've been doing this a long time. I think there are some trends. They're going to have tendency breakers that they've been holding on to all year for a game like this. But you mentioned it at the top of this segment before I came on here, what Brady's doing. Even McDermott and Babbage, I think there's a lot of narratives out there that McDermott only plays one style of defense. We've seen in the postseason here, wild card, tons of dime look, a lot of nickel, zero base. You go back to this weekend, tons of base, right? Not much nickel, not a lot of dime looks. And so he's really tailoring game plans specific to opponents. And I think that's the game within the game that I'm most interested to see is we can do all the legwork we want leading up to this thing, but I think a lot of it's going to get thrown out the window because it's going to be so specific to each opponent here.
And it really has been. And going to that, different game plans for different opponents. You look at that Ravens game where I know you guys over Cover One were really fighting the good fight, kind of talking about how, look, the offense sure was not like impressive in the second half, but it wasn't like they necessarily, I don't want to say shouldn't have thrown the ball, but their success rates, Eric Turner, I know, has been breaking this down a lot. Their success rates running the ball in the first and second half were still higher than their pass rates. But what would you tell people, who are maybe nervous about that offensive production against the Ravens going into this Chiefs game? What would you tell people to maybe kind of give them faith? What have you seen from this team that still gives you hope? Because they are still, I think, the only team outside of a bunch of backups playing Denver to score 30 points on the Chiefs in the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, so I'm a little torn because I do want to give fans and people hope. I am a little nervous that the offense can't stall out in the ways that they have here in the first 2 rounds of the postseason, right? Even against the Broncos, that first half was a lot closer than it needed to be. And, I don't think the defense is getting enough credit here for the first 2 matchups. That was the thing going into this postseason we heard the most about is Sean McDermott's defense can't play in the postseason. And everybody was scared of the Ravens, right? And again, whether or not you believe the turnovers were forced or unforced, they got turnovers. And we heard all year they weren't going to be able to maintain and sustain turnovers. Well, they did, right? And in the first couple of games, I think it's weighed a little heavier towards the defense being getting that, as Bruce Nolan likes to say, plurality pie of who's responsible for the victory. I think defense has kind of held their weight in their end of the bargain here in the first couple of matchups. I don't think you can do that this week. And I think the offense has to execute at a bit of a higher level. You have to score, and you have to stay ahead of the Kansas City Chiefs and kind of dictate that game script. So I do want to see more from the offense. But like you said, this is the year to really, I think, attack the Kansas City Chiefs. Their defense, I am fearful of Steve Spagnuolo. I think in terms of what he can draw up and mixing coverages and some of the blitz packages that he can get. If you get into the third and long situations, he's just dynamic. But this isn't a defense that necessarily scares me. I know Bills fans are down on the Bills defense. The Bills defense is better than the Kansas City Chiefs defense this year in almost every metric. And when you watch them on film, even that Houston game, Stroud took a lot of bad sacks. Some of them, Kansas City just did a good job getting the rush, but some of them were just bad sacks by C.J. Stroud. But really, their special teams lost that game. I think the offense moved the ball at times, and then they lacked execution. I think that was really probably the biggest issue for the Bills against the Ravens was not the play calling. We always defer to play calling when things don't go wrong. And I know people were frustrated with Brady, but I think the Bills lacked a little bit of execution there towards the end of that game on some of the drives. And if 1 or 2 plays, if Dalton Kincaid doesn't slip and he catches that ball from Allen, that drive looks totally different. Some of the success looks totally different, and it's slim margin. So it's all about execution. It's all about fundamentals. But the offense has to tighten up just a little bit on that stuff here as you go forward. You can't make those mistakes. They're not turning the ball over, but they're still not executing at their highest level right now.
So, Aaron, with the offense as a whole, I feel like the focal point the past few weeks has been how well the Bills are running the ball, and a lot of that has to do with the offensive line. The first time around these two teams played each other, Spencer Brown wasn't there. Now he's back. And is that going to kind of let the Bills lean more into the running game, or do you think it's going to be a little bit more of a kind of a 50-50 split with running and passing? I mean, with how well they've been running the ball, why would you go away from it, right?
Yeah, I think it needs to be balanced for sure, but I don't want to see them go away from it. And honestly, that was a concern of mine going into the postseason, was the games that I've been most frustrated with the offense were, I think, some of the ones earlier on where I think Brady maybe got away from the run a little early, even when they're down in a game, sort of getting away from that run game. And I think the Bills are one of these teams similar to the Ravens, similar to how Detroit Lions have been this year, where even if you're down by 10, your run game is still an option. It's still something that can get you back into the game. You can generate explosives. And so Kansas City is susceptible. Like, there is some ways to run on them. You're not going to get tons of big explosives on them, but you can rattle off 4.5, 5 yards of carry on this team and set yourself up to be in those 3rd and 2s. I think what you can't do is come out too early. I know fans are frustrated they're not passing a lot on early downs, but if you get behind the chains against a Steve Spagnuolo defense and you're in 3rd and 8 or worse, that's where the exotic pressures come. That is where he sends a little bit more stuff that creates a lot of the havoc plays, and you just can't have those in these games. So I think you need to lean into your run game, get physical with them. They're going to do a really good job of pinning their ears back and rushing you. Karlaftis, Chris Jones even. But I think where you can get them and where they're vulnerable is Spencer Brown, I think, can work Karlaftis in the run game. I think Deion Dawkins can do his thing. And on the interior, this is the best offensive line we've seen in the Sean McDermott, Josh Allen era. And I think you need to utilize that physicality. Games are won in the trenches. Big games are won in the trenches. Running games travel well on the road. And that's kind of been the thing that the Bills just haven't had in their attempt to get over this hump.
Looking at some of the weapons for the Bills' offense, a name that I hear from callers often, we talk about him often, namely just due to it's the everyone eats, but they did trade for him, Amari Cooper. He's been a weird addition, Aaron. I think he's done wonders for the Bills' offense in terms of spreading everyone out. You have to put another corner on him. You at times have to double him up. I think he's opened up Khalil Shakir. He helped initially when Keon Coleman was first coming. Coleman ultimately dealing with an injury, I think kind of derailed him a little bit. But there's also been games where Cooper's just, you kind of forget he's on the team. Only one target against Baltimore. Is this kind of a matchup with McDuffie that maybe Cooper could exploit them? Maybe see the Bills actually push the ball down the field. They're arguably not going to have the same field conditions. It's going to be, quote-unquote, warmer in Kansas City. Could we maybe see the Bills really want to extend the field here with the passing game?
I don't know what they're going to do with McDuffie. That is something that I'm really interested to see because you're right. Cooper hasn't had the production that necessarily warrants shadowing, but he's had the previous historical production that defensive coordinator could say, hey, we have to keep a top on this guy because at any point he could go off. So there is just a built-in respect for Amari Cooper, even though that production doesn't necessarily exist with the Bills in this season. So I'm interested to see what they do there. If it is Trent McDuffie, I respect his game. He's one of my favorite players to watch, actually. But I'm not scared. If they want to line him up on the outside against Cooper, I would take shots. I would attack it a little bit. I'm not saying force feed it, but you've got to at least script in some shots to him downfield, even if it's Coleman. If you want to get Coleman on a smaller guy, you've got to at least try to take those shots. Joe Marino has done a really good job, though, pointing out the Bills haven't been great at taking shots downfield and passing 20-plus yards downfield this year. And so you got to probably generate a couple of those in this game. You got to find some explosives. But if they're going to, match McDuffie on a Cooper or something like that, I think it opens up Khalil Shakir for a big game. And Eric Turner had talked about, with some of these pressures and how much Spagnuolo likes to blitz, I think you'll see a heavy dose of screens. And so you could see a big game for Khalil Shakir and even a Curtis Samuel in those roles of being just kind of like a check of pressure going to the screen game. It's been something that's been more successful for the Bills than in previous years. I know people probably still have a bad taste in their mouth from the 3rd and 5 screen to Dawson Knox that ended in a tackle for loss and killed the drive. But on the whole, when you really look at the season, it's been something that's really been successful. Kansas City is a good tackling team, but I would still challenge them to come up and be physical and try to tackle Khalil Shakir in space.
It is something you brought up, too, what Joe Marino was talking about, the Bills not being awesome or really even any good at passing the ball 20 yards downfield. One of the early plays in the Baltimore game was a shot to Matt Collins, who was open. Allen just kind of missed him. But Khalil Shakir, another guy you mentioned there, had arguably one of the plays of the game, a 34-yard catch down the middle of the seam from Allen. He's right back to what he was early in the year, too, where it's just every time the ball was thrown to him, he's catching. He's 13 targets, 12 catches. He's getting over 60 yards in these 2 playoff games. Aaron, it's been the story all year for me with Shakir. He seems to be the key to the passing game. If him and Allen are on the same page, if they're hitting early, it just feels like they're extending drives.
Yeah, and he is so dynamic, right? Like the Bills were really trying to replace that Beasley role over the last year and a half without him, and they had some production, but he does everything that Cole Beasley does and so much more, right? Like with what he can do after the catch. We saw last week his ability to stretch the seam. He does have the ability to go up and make a contested catch, so it's such a versatile piece. And just in, breaking down that Houston Texans game, even the middle of the field seems pretty vulnerable to me in the Kansas City defense as a way to attack and generate explosives. I saw wide receivers run and open pretty much throughout the day for the Houston Texans. It was just a matter of C.J. Stroud took a little bit too many sacks, held on the ball a little bit too long. He did hit some of those to extend some of the drives, but I would expect if you're going to generate the explosives, I don't think it'll be on the outside. I think you take some of those shots, like I said earlier, to Cooper, but I think your real bread and butter is going to be work in the middle of the field, and where that's another spot where Shakir can come in. So I'm really expecting a big day from him, but also the tight ends. I would force they're good against running backs out of the backfield, but I would force those linebackers and safeties to have to cover a Dalton Kincaid. I mean, he hasn't met the production of where he was drafted, but Knox and Kincaid have been pretty solid, and I think they demand quite a bit of attention, and I would go right to him in the middle of the field and force those safeties and linebackers to cover.
Aaron Quinn of Cover One on the Wester Hotline. Aaron, talking tight ends there, let's switch things up, go to the Bills' defense. Travis Kelce, old friend that has always caused problems for every team that plays the Chiefs. Does he kind of take the focal point this week like Derrick Henry did last week? I mean, the Bills' defense did a great job shutting Henry down, kept him under 90 yards on the ground. Is he kind of the guy that you're worried, aside from Patrick Mahomes, because obviously we know how he can extend plays and things like that, but is Kelce the guy where if the Bills' defense can shut him down, okay, we'll figure everything else out as long as Kelce doesn't get his, we should be okay. Is that kind of the mindset you think, or where do you think things are in that aspect?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I think Kelce is definitely the priority, and we saw that in that first matchup. Terrell Bernard did a fantastic job of just all of his focus was on Kelce and taking that away. This is something I mentioned last week, where we do these preview shows and we preview a team and we see whether it's a strength or a weakness or something that some team was able to take away, and we point to it and say, hey, that's the way, right? That's how you beat this team. That team also knows, right? So they're also going to try to scheme up some ways to offset what they have at least seen the Bills try to do to take Travis Kelce away. And so that's going to be an interesting matchup within the matchup. I think it's going to matter a lot the health of Matt Milano. I know Sean McDermott was pretty vague on some of those answers, so I'm hoping we see something today as to whether or not he's practicing or anything like that. It sounds like there's no reason to think he's not healthy, but I know there's been some concern out there. I'm big time concerned about Christian Benford, right? And where he's at in the concussion protocol here going into the week. Because the other concern I have in terms of a matchup on offense is how they're involving Worthy from the last time we watched Kansas City. And I know, there's all going to be the comparison between Worthy and Coleman, and Bills fans don't want Worthy to be successful because of that pick, but they are really getting him involved in this offense as the season goes on. And the run game hasn't been great for Kansas City. Pacheco can go off at any time, and he could be a real difficult tackle at any time, but it's just not been there like it has in years past. But using Worthy in the way that they do is really an extension of the run game, and it forces you to come up and tackle. And that's still an area where the Bills have been better than they have in past years, but it's still an area that I'm always concerned is when teams force you to come up, they stretch you on the horizontal and force you to make a tackle. That's something that's always going to concern me with this Bills defense. And if Benford can't go, even a bigger concern, because he's one of your best at being able to come up and make tackles on the perimeter like that.
All right, Aaron Quinn, Cover One. Aaron, what do you guys got cooking up over at Cover One for this week? Big game, first AFC Championship appearance since 2020.
Yeah, so Eric and Anthony are jumping in the film room here tonight, so that'll be on the Cover One YouTube channel. You want to get in there and check that out. They got a great show set up. And then Greg and I are actually going – we usually go Wednesdays. We're going Thursday this week with Kent Swanson of the Kansas City Sports Net to preview the game. And as always, just check out our YouTube channel. All the guys at Cover One are just grinding real hard this time of year to just bring you as much content, and follow wherever you're on social media. Just search Cover One. You'll find all of us out there working hard to get you guys ready.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. We'll talk again soon. Enjoy the game.